Hey, everybody, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. You know, we started like right on the gong at 10 a.m. yesterday. Not quite as punctual here today, but that is a continued pursuit of excellence that we are chasing after on the program. Nonetheless, it's fun on the program today. We got our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with Jeff Sintel a bit later on. That G-Day visitor list has really grown, and there are some very interesting names. There are also, let's be honest, a couple names not on that list. We'll deal with all of that with Jeff coming up in just a bit. There's something really funny about spring game attendance I want to talk about today as well, and how Georgia may have a chance to either troll or dominate its local regional rivals. I'll let you decide which it's going to be. We'll do that coming up. Also, Kirby Smart, really insightful comments on Saturday about a position group that has become really important when it comes to winning a national championship. In fact, we'll start with that right now, as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Kirby Smart is a very intense football coach. You see that on practice anytime you get a chance to look at it, whether it be in person from time to time. We get a chance to see that. Those videos that UGA releases. When Kirby's on the practice field, he is in his home, in his territory, as much as anyone is in any walk of life. He loves being out on that practice field, at least I gather. And that's true for all the position groups. He's a very hands-on coach. But my eyewitness account would lead me to believe that there's no position more important to him than the defensive back. That's because of his background as a player. That's because of his, background as a coach. He just takes a very personal motivation. It's a mission almost to make sure that Georgia's secondary is playing as well as it possibly can be. And I think that's a really fun thing to watch when you get a chance to see this unfold. So when Kirby speaks about secondary, I find myself sometimes leaning in a little bit more, listening in a little bit more closely because of how personal that subject is for him. Well, on Saturday, when Smart met with the media, he talked a good bit about his defensive backs. And obviously, this group is going to be, for the first few weeks of the season, certainly during spring practice and for a large measure of the summer practice, and as I said a moment ago, even into the season, it's going to be a little bit of a work in progress because, as I mentioned at the very start of the spring, this was one of the DawgNation Daily episodes we did right as spring practice was kicking off, that as big a deal as it was for Georgia in 2017, or I should say in 2018, to replace Roquan Smith, the 2017 Buckus Award winner, I don't know that it's not just as significant in Georgia's pursuit of replacing DeAndre Baker in 2019. After all, Baker was the Jim Thorpe Award winner last year. I don't know that he was quite as dominant as Roquan was in 2017, but he was very good, and replacing him can be a bit of a difficult task. So how is that process going? Well, if you read between the lines with Kirby, it sounds like he's, I think, pretty optimistic right now. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it sounds like he's feeling pretty good about the situation in the moment. I was listening in very closely to something he did say on Saturday because there are still some things that he doesn't yet know about his defensive secondary, but there is one thing seemingly he's pretty well decided, he's already pretty sure of. In fact, let you hear Kirby on that point right now.
We've had a good spring. I don't know if that's a credit to the young secondary or whether that's a lack of depth at receiver. Probably didn't have our best day today. We gave up some plays on the back end, more than we did the last week. But those kids grow, they're growing. What you know is we've got what we're going to have. There's nobody else coming, so it's very unique that we have depth and we're able to move people around and try to figure out the best parts. And, you're really trying to get the guys that don't know what they're doing to be able to do that. There's a few guys that have played a lot of snaps here with the likes of Stokes and Tyson and JR and even Richard. Those four guys played a lot of snaps. So we're trying to get those other guys ready to go play. And the good thing is they're here to get these reps. I think that's going to pay off for us in the fall. I think we have the potential to have a very fast secondary. I don't know how instinctive we are yet. I don't know how great we are at playing the ball, but we do have some speed back there.
So I think it's really interesting. Kirby says, I don't know about this. I don't know if we're instinctive, and I don't know about that. I don't know if we're going to be, everything that we can be. But I do know this. I know we're fast, and I know we got some speed back there. And it's easy to gloss over that. It's easy to just, file that away with everything else the coaches say about their team this time of year. But just keep this in mind. There are a lot of coaches around the SEC, around the Southeast, and in the group of programs trying to compete in this sport at the highest level. There are a lot of those programs that would love to be able to inject some speed into their defensive secondary. That's the kind of thing you have to be able to recruit. And when it comes to the guys who can really run the way that Tyson Campbell can, for instance, guys that can really run, there just aren't very many of them, and the recruiting battles for them are going to be intense. So don't gloss over the fact that Kirby Smart says, I know we got speed back there, because I think in large measure speed's half the battle, and the fact that Georgia's going to be able to run with anyone gives this defensive secondary a chance, I think, to be successful this season. The other thing that's interesting, and Kirby said this now a couple times, that one of the cool things about the defensive secondary compared to a lot of the other position groups is the guys who are going to be here on the field in 2019 are all going through spring practice right now. That includes a couple of the early guys like DJ Daniel, guys like Tyreek Stevenson. Those are young players. In Daniel's case, a junior college transfer, and Stevenson's case, just a freshman. Those are guys, though, that have a chance to contribute on the field this year. Spring practice is a big step towards being able to do that. It's a chance to get acclimated to the program, but it's also a chance to grow and learn and develop. You just heard Smart saying how much they're trying to take advantage of that opportunity thus far this spring in these practices, getting these guys ready to go. Those extra practices, I think Smart would say, and I think that Charlton Warren, the defensive backs coach, would say, is an incredible luxury towards getting there. And right now, Stevenson and Daniel are getting a chance to feast on all of this. And the early returns on them, at least to the extent that we kind of know, are apparently pretty good. I know Eric Stokes the other day, one of the guys that may be a starting cornerback for Georgia this year, who had some nice moments in a uniform a year ago, when he was asked about how those two newcomers are. Guys, by the way, he's competing with. He's trying to hold off in that battle to be a starting cornerback for Georgia. But even in the midst of that conversation, Stokes is still seeing some that he likes from both those guys, and he tossed a compliment in their direction. Here's what Eric Stokes said then.
Oh man, they are two competitors. Like, I'm not finna lie. Like, they love going at it. They I know for a fact if they get beat, they come back mad. They all just I just love having them out there with us, because I just need somebody that I know for a fact if he get beat, he get messed up. He got that I know he got a competitive nature to where I know for a fact that next play he finna give it all he got.
Yeah, so listen, I like to hear a guy like Eric Stokes saying that about a couple of his defensive backs, those newcomers there, because for Georgia to be as good as it can be and for it to have the most effective, capable replacement for DeAndre Baker, it's an all-hands-on-deck situation, which means you got to get a contribution from hopefully both those guys, but at least one of those guys being ready to do something in 2019. I think that's a fun thing to think about. Kirby wasn't done, though, talking about the defensive secondary. In addition to the regular cornerbacks, kind of those regular safeties, there's also that issue of that fifth defensive back, that star position guy, and kind of where that stands, the latest and all that. A bunch of guys battling it out right now. Smart did give us a bit of an update there.
It's competition across the board. 3 guys are working there, Devad, Poole, and Mark Webb, all 3 working there. And you know, all 3 of those kids have gotten better. I am so proud of how they've worked. But nobody has said, I'm clear-cut that guy. I'm the one that's going to know what to do every play it the right way, play it with toughness. You got to be a tackler, but you got to be able to cover. It takes a unique player to be able to play that position. You know, you got to be strong. You got to be able to take on linemen, but you got to be able to cover slots. They're developing. They're practicing hard, but nobody's said that I'm the guy. There's no one there.
I may be guilty of reading too much into this, but I take what Smart says there as a pretty positive comment, because I remember a year ago before the injury how complimentary Smart was of Devad Wilson at that time. You know, we really, prior to the injury last spring, I think we're looking at spring practice as if Devad Wilson was going to be one of the freshmen that made a major impact last year. Injury, as I said, ended up taking him out of the mix for pretty much the entire season of the Sugar Bowl, and then he played well at the Sugar Bowl. So if we're kind of doing an algebra equation here, solving for X, I feel like there's some evidence to suggest that Devad Wilson's a pretty good player. Kirby's comments about that in the spring, what we all saw with our own eyes during the Sugar Bowl, Devad seems like a pretty interesting prospect right now. The fact that Mark Webb and William Poole are kind of in that same mix with him, I think that speaks pretty well of where Poole and Webb are if they're compared favorably right now with Wilson, because I think we've seen some stuff to say. We kind of like what he brings to the table. So maybe that entire group right there is looking pretty good. And on yesterday's show, I kind of gave you a list of a lot of those guys I'm kind of rooting for on G-Day, guys I'd like to see good things from. And I guess, there was a flavor to that. A lot of those guys were 2017 signees. And so maybe you add Poole and Webb both into that discussion of fan favorites who are looking for a bigger opportunity at Georgia. Maybe they get a chance to earn that come Saturday. Here's a little more of Kirby on that star position.
They're pretty similar. None of them have enough experience to really separate themselves as different. Poole played a little bit last year. Devad played a little bit last year. Mark played a lot of money, and Mark continues to be the money, but Mark is a physical football player that we're trying to find a role for outside of just third down.
So, listen, I think that's going to be a fun battle to continue watching out for. I think that Mark Webb made a very calculated decision when he moved from wide receiver at the beginning of his career over to defensive back. There were returns in 2017 that he was already looking good at practice then and maybe in an expanded role here this year. One more thing on the defensive secondary, though, before we move on, and it is a name that has been talked about a lot this offseason. It's Richard LeCounte, a former five-star signee, the vocal leader, really, of that 2017 class, and now a guy going into his junior season that's at a bit of a crossroads. We saw some really good moments from LeCounte a year ago, I believe. We probably also saw some moments where LeCounte showed that he still needs some improvement to be one of the top-flight players in the SEC. Where does all of that stand with the LeCounte right now? Well, Smart also updated that on Saturday, too.
As far as Richard, I think it's been, inconsistent. He still doesn't know his assignments in and out, and I think he'd be the first to tell you. We're trying to train him at left and right safety where he's only played free safety before, and that's for his development and growth. So it puts a little more responsibility on him to know the call every time, and when you got to play both safeties, it's a little more taxing on you mentally. And he's responded well to that. He's just got to continue to grow.
So once again, at the risk of reading way too much into something, the thing that I hear from Smart there on LeCounte is, hey, we're also cross-training him right now to maybe be the heir apparent to J.R. Reed and what would be LeCounte's final season at Georgia next year. So for the people who are concerned about LeCounte and maybe fearful that he won't live up to the hype that he had coming out of high school, do keep that in mind. That when Georgia looks beyond 2019 into 2020, and it's credit to the staff that it does do that, they're still thinking about a very big role for Richard LeCounte. I joke about this all the time. I haven't sold any of my LeCounte stock. I still believe that 2019 can be a big year for him. It sounds like he's got a lot that he's working on at practice, but it also sounds like the possibility for success is certainly there for him. Let me also kind of wrap up this entire discussion and kind of put a bow on this by saying it this way. I think it's interesting that Kirby talked so much about the secondary on Saturday after the second scrimmage heading towards G-Day this Saturday. I don't believe that a really good secondary, a good crop of defensive backs, has ever been more important at college football, especially at that top elite college football playoff level. Look at the huge number of great wide receivers Clemson has. Look at the huge number of great wide receivers that Alabama has. You've got to be able to have guys that can match up with those guys. It sounds like Kirby Smart thinks there's the possibility that his group is heading towards being able to do just that. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you. Thanks for being with us today. No matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them. Apple Podcast Player, the Google Podcast Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just glad you have found DawgNation Daily here today. We got Jeff Sintel coming up a little bit later on. I got a funny thing that seems to have popped up, maybe more bad blood between Alabama and Clemson. This relates to Georgia. I'll explain that in just a minute as well. Before any of that, though, let me remind you that we are just 24 hours away. Tomorrow is the big day for us as DawgNation returns to the Marlowe's Tavern in Dunwoody for our DawgNation spring game preview. It's tomorrow from 6 to 8 p.m. The address, for those of you listening radio or podcast, I'll give it to you a couple times. You can write it down, put it into your device, and head your GPS straight for us. 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway. Love to see you there at 6 p.m. tomorrow. It won't just be me who's there. John Stinchcomb going to be on hand as well, the great former Georgia Bulldog. John's actually even going to be with us on DawgNation Daily tomorrow, too, so that's going to be really fun with John Stinchcomb. Looking forward to that, and looking forward to seeing all of you tomorrow night, 6 to 8 p.m. at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. It is going to be a great time. We're excited about you being there. Okay, so let me see if I can tell the story before Jeff Sintel comes on and not screw up all the details. First of all, we are heading towards G-Day on Saturday, and this has been a big deal in the Kirby Smart era. Back in 2016, 93K. Huge crowds, really the last 2 years, and Kirby Smart has done his part towards pushing Georgia fans to fill the stadium again this year. Now, this is not an official push this year. There's no 93K day, graphics on social media that I've seen anywhere, but attendance is still important. And earlier this spring, Smart kind of sent out a clarion call to dog fans of make sure you're between the hedges come April 20th. Here's what Smart said at the time.
I think the University of Georgia fans love this game, and I certainly don't expect anything less. I mean, I'm not sitting here proclaiming that everybody has to come to the game. I think we've got a really good football team coming back. I think we got an exciting team. I think that is an opportunity to showcase the talents of 14 new freshmen that just got here that people want to come watch and see. It certainly has impacted our recruiting. We're going to have some of the best players in the country coming by to G-Day because they want to see what the atmosphere is like in Athens. And, I just think that's the nature of the beast when you're at University of Georgia, that fans want to come watch it. So it's a free chance to watch a game for a lot of people that have never seen a game here.
So no doubt it'll be interesting to see how many fans do end up attending G-Day. And like it happens a lot of years, spring game attendance has become a little bit of a touchy subject. Let me see if I can show you a pretty funny tweet here from a Clemson fan site, because Clemson had spring game a couple of weeks ago, and Clemson reported its attendance to be 60,000. Now, if you look at the picture that's on the screen, for those of you watching on video, you could make a case this kind of looks like 60,000 for Death Valley. The upper deck doesn't appear to be full. The lower bowl seems to be mostly full. So last week, Alabama has its spring game, and their reported attendance was just slightly higher than Clemson's at 61,000. And I saw some pictures of this on social media. At one point in time, that's hard to say, which point in the game this was taken. Sometimes that can be misleading. But it didn't look like there was much more than 20,000, 30,000 people in the stadium. But according to Alabama, it was, quote-unquote, 61,000 people in the building. And a lot of Clemson fans took that as a way of saying, wait, this is Alabama just trying to one-up us with their attendance total. And I guess Ohio State even maybe one-upped Alabama with it. It's just a few more people in the building than what Alabama said they had. So Georgia gets a chance to go last. So even if it doesn't have the most people in the building, does Georgia, pencil whip its opponents here and just kind of write 63,000 or some higher number? Clearly there's a little bit of bad blood right now based on spring game attendance, which is the most Southern college football thing in the world. But Georgia gets a chance to bat last on this, so we can either fill its stadium and actually be the attendance winner, or it can just say that it is at this point in time. Who's really there to dispute that? I thought that was kind of funny, Alabama and Clemson even battling it out when it comes to spring game attendance. All right, we got a lot of good stuff coming up still later on here today on DawgNation Daily. We will get to all of that in a bit, but for now, on Tuesdays, one of the things that you love is that recruiting information from Jeff. He is our recruiting insider, and it's time for our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with him right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Each week here on DawgNation Daily, Jeff Sintel gives us his twist on UGA recruiting and the trends associated with that. But when you want chef-inspired food with a twist, you want to find the Marlowe's Tavern right there in your neighborhood. We love it. Craft cocktails, chef-inspired food, and you have a chance to get in touch yourself. Become a Marlowe's insider by texting the word Marlowe's, Marlows, to 24242. And you can find out about all the great things going on at the tavern right there in your neighborhood. Jeff Sintel, good morning. Thanks for being back here today on DawgNation Daily for our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Hope you're doing well.
Brandon, I tell you, man, I was just listening to the glory of that read right there. I mean, you were like a gym dog rolling through the floor exercises with the twist, with the vault, and coming down and going from a recruiting twist segue to a Marlowe's Tavern tell-all. Brandon, it's just G-Day time, man, but you're using terms like pencil whip and last at bat. I mean, you're already in season form, sir.
You know what? We're having a good time around here. We're excited about G-Day on Saturday and excited about the way that the recruiting part of this is taking shape. I guess, though, to kind of stay on brand for a moment, I got to talk to you about the guy that's not coming before we get to the guys who are going to be there, because what would a Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update be if I wasn't hand-wringing about something? I mean, it's over with George and Brian Brzee, right? It's not we have tagged the toe. This thing is done. It is over. This is likely the last time we mentioned Brzee during this segment. Is that fair to say?
Well, Brennan, with Clemson and their recruit, once they commit, they don't want them to go anywhere else. You got me laughing this morning, man. Now you've got a toe tag reference today as well. Let's just say this: we've dropped Brian Brzee a couple weeks ago from the top targets list at UGA for a very good reason, and I think that very good reason is becoming evident right now.
So, if we're going to stay with the tag of the toe metaphor, let's do just a very quick autopsy. We don't have to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I am curious: where did it go wrong? Was this the connection to the girlfriend, which we at one point in time joked about on this show, the fact that I guess she's going to Clemson. Is this a concern about what has happened for Georgia with its defensive linemen? I don't believe the Dogs have had a defensive lineman drafted, since maybe 2014. What ultimately is the story of why Clemson was able to make the connection that Georgia was not?
Well, I don't know if the girlfriend theory flies for me, Brandon, but what it is maybe anybody, the significant other in future Brian Brzez's life, is going to be enhanced by the fact he makes, $20 million in the NFL rather than $7 million in the NFL with his first contract. Here's what it is. Georgia runs a 3-4 defense. That sets up splendidly, my friend, for lots of inside linebackers, lots of outside linebackers. Doesn't set up so splendidly as of yet for defensive linemen. That's why Clemson is just bringing in these D linemen by the bushel. Guys that I know in this program, a lot of folks that follow this stuff closely would like to see. And right now, Brandon, it is what it is. We say a lot. Sometimes you got to finish second place. And Georgia recruiting has advanced to the point where this is the nation's number one overall prospect out of Maryland. And Georgia was a solid number 2, number 3 for the entirety, I would say, at least going back to last March in the Brian Brzez discussion here. But you've got a situation with Clemson. They've won the big games. They've slayed the dragon. They've beaten Alabama twice in stakeholder games, so to speak. And they've also got a trove of defensive linemen on their way to the NFL as well.
So just one more quick final follow-up on this to kind of drill down a little bit more. It sounds like based on some of the movement as of late with, the recruiting chat around Brzez, had he come to Georgia, Georgia was hopefully going to get him to be that guy that plays inside, that, as Kirby Smart has described it, a quick, twitchy 3 technique. He gets to be a true defensive end at Clemson. Is that kind of the position story here between these two schools?
Well, I'd love to see what Brian Brzez looks like as his junior year at Clemson. He's probably going to be 6'5.5" and 315 and pretty chiseled and all rocked out. That's going to be a very intriguing-looking defensive end. I just described it a theory. If a young man has some gait to himself, and he's already pretty active and mobile, and he's 290 already as a senior, going into his senior season of high school. That just lends itself to the inside of the defensive line because you can make a lot of plays and impact a lot of A gaps and B gaps by doing that.
Let me transition to guys who will be here on Saturday, and I'm excited about this list. It's growing. You've been covering this at the forum at forum.DawgNation.com, and you've also had some great stuff, of course, on the website, DawgNation.com, about this. And maybe the most interesting of all, and that's not an easy thing to say, but the fact that Mikkel Sherman, a linebacker who's been very outspoken about Georgia on Twitter as of late, is also taking, I guess, an official visit to Athens on Saturday. Boy, this is a pretty interesting deal right now, isn't it, Jeff? I mean, Sherman has not been shy about talking about UGA, and they're going to get a chance to roll out the red carpet for him on Saturday. This is a pretty crucial moment in the 2020 class. We're very early in the cycle, but in Athens on Saturday, hopefully the weather's nice, hopefully the stands are full, and Sherman's going to apparently get an eyeful of what Athens brings to the table, right?
Yeah, Brandon, I tell you what, you're starting out like Fromm in the SEC game, man. I don't know if you built your show this way, but you talk about bad news defensive linemen, and now you start out with good news outside linebackers.
Yeah, listen.
That's just kind of reinforces the point where Georgia right now is a great place to get linebackers moving into the NFL. The 2 highest drafted linebackers over the last 5 or 6 years, inside linebacker and outside linebacker, those were both from Georgia, Leonard Floyd and also Roquan Smith. Everybody knows that name. So this is another first official for Mr. Sherman. He's a guy that's bouncing back from a knee recovery, a knee injury. Man, he was fantastic at the opening finals last year out in Texas, running with all those wide receivers in the fastest man competition. You talk about when we speak the phrase wreak havoc, that's what Mikkel Sherman has been asked to do for St. John's College up in D.C. Is sometimes he plays outside, sometimes he plays a little inside. His game plan, his modus operandi on the field is to make offensive coordinators sleepless the night before. He's going to hold back a little bit with a lot of his training this spring. He's not going to do any of the openings this year. He's going to maybe make sure everything is right and everything is in great standing, and he's just really locked in and ready to go for his senior football season. But Mikkel Sherman will be coming with Team Sherman, lots of family members for another visit. And two quick things to think about here. The last school he visited was the University of Georgia. It was approximately March 1st that weekend around his birthday. He brought, I think, sister, mother, brother-in-law along with him on that visit, and those are the same traveling party, which will make up things right now for his official. Perhaps the only thing he hasn't seen is what a game day environment will look like at Georgia. And, Brandon, true to your opening topic, do you feel that Georgia puts up that 75,000 number and wears the crown of spring games in that last at-bat?
I mean, if you really want my honest prediction, I think they get about 59 or 60 and call it 70. That's what I think they're going to do.
You're going to see some fuzzy accounting there by the
Yeah, I'm going to give you more analysis on this than you probably care to get, but think about those aluminum bleachers, Jeff. If people are sitting in them for a fall Saturday, they have to slide close together and they're jam-packed in there. They can spread out a little bit for G-Day and kind of give themselves a little more leg room, and for me, a little more hip room, something like that I desperately need in a situation like this. And the section looks full, even if there's still room to fit more people in there, and so that gives you pretty good clearance to kind of fudge the number a little bit. So I think that when Georgia turns in its attendance, I think the number starts with a 7. I think it's probably more accurately listed in the 6s, but listen, all's fair in love and spring game attendance, so I don't mind. I don't mind Georgia doing what it needs to do here.
Well, it'd be funny. I'm sure, Brandon, you would be pleasantly surprised if the nation shows up and wants to check out and get cozy in that west end zone and maybe see guys like Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift and Andrew Thomas and J.R. Reed, certainly in their last spring game G-Days, potentially for a lot of those names at Georgia. And I think this is different. Maybe this is a sign that Georgia has arrived as a mature program. There's no ludicrous concert. There's no oddity of a 5-star quarterback or number 1 recruiting class early enrollees to come see, although everybody's going to be very chomping at the bit to see what Mr. Smith and Mr. Dean and Mr. Stevenson and all those fellows can do. But I think this is the one where, the west end zone is not even upgraded where folks can catch a good look at that. I think the Easter weekend might keep that number down from something ginormous, but I don't know. I've got a feeling that a lot of fans here do sense there's something special here around this program, and I think maybe that number looks like a comfortable 70 in my mind.
Yeah, you may be right about that. I guess to be way more process-oriented than I should be, if Kirby thought they were heading towards a big number, I think he'd be fanning the flames of it a little bit more. I don't think you want to ask for a big crowd and then not get it. So thus far, he's been pretty casual with his even mentions of fans coming out for G-Day. He hasn't made a big push. Remember, back in 2016, he was on a campaign to get people to come out for 93K Day. Maybe he felt like he needed it more then than he does now. That's maybe understandable. He's not doing that a ton. Now, I'm guessing we may hear from Smart today or may not. We'll certainly hear from him at some point this week. So we'll see if he turns up the heat now in the final days before G-Day on challenging fans to be there. But up to this point in time, he hasn't really done a big public campaign for that, which leads me to believe that maybe they think they're going to have some challenge with the holiday weekend.
Well, that's obviously evident there with all the planners and everybody wanting to get somewhere for Easter. I do get that. But all I see here, Brandon, is I see from my side of things and my process orientation is I would say that there's some unique symmetry here to this game because in that 2016 game where he was fanning the flames, as you termed it, there was a young DeAndre Swift walking around the campus that day with his family and going, goodness, there's just something different and special about this place. And there's going to be folks like Mikkel Sherman. There's going to be folks like Kendall Milton that will have the same ability to maybe come to those own conclusions, including a new addition to that G-Day RSVP list, and that is Boogie himself. That would be Jalen Kimber, the really fast cornerback out of Texas.
That is nice to hear that Kimber's now added that list as well. And, Jeff, I'll kind of tie him into what we were just saying about Sherman. And, how does Georgia feel about hosting these, official visits on this G-Day weekend? On the one hand, it's not nearly as big a distraction for the coaches as a game weekend in the fall would be. On the other hand, we're still pretty early on in the 2020 recruiting cycle, which gives that visit high kind of a chance to wear off. How does UGA feel about official visits on G-Day Saturday?
Well, I think to each of their own, I guess, with a guy like Jacoby Cowan, who's a name to think about on the defensive line for Georgia. He's preferring to come, because he's already been to G-Day in games before. he's preferring to visit where he can get more one-on time and more chill time and relaxed time with the coaches. I think in some cases, and this is what I think is maybe the big takeaway here, Brandon, when spring officials are what they are, it is a longer time to hold on to recruits. It is an earlier part of their process. But in some cases, when I guess the staff and the players feel like this thing's not going to go a lot further, this thing's not going to go another 2-3 months into the summer right before the season starts with those pep rallies in August. I think the spring officials here, especially for a spring game, when a prospect knows that he's going to make his mind up 1 to 2 months, maybe even lesser than that, I think that's where a school like the University of Georgia can still notch a big win.
Let me try to do a few rapid-fire things before we let you go. I know you kind of teased this a little bit at DawgNation.com. Should we expect the 5-star offensive lineman Terrence Johnson to be in attendance on Saturday?
Yeah, that's the thing. One of the things we do take a look at now is how Georgia always has one guy that kind of flies under the radar a little bit. It was very intriguing to me that you kept seeing guys, and I guess Brzee would be a false positive here, but Clay Webb kept showing up for G-Day after G-Day when everybody in the world thought, why isn't he at Alabama? He's probably going to go to Alabama or Auburn or Clemson. That's a head-to-head there with the Bulldogs that Georgia won when it comes to Clay Webb as well, with Clemson and also Alabama and Auburn. But for this thing right here, when you're thinking about Terrence Johnson, now these are rapid-fire visits. And what also has really happened, he's had 2 unofficials, and now the family's coming in on the official. That's being reported in a lot of places right now. I think the highly intriguing part is something I just kind of snuck into that G-Day visitors list that finally went up on the main site yesterday, whereas it was a quote, and it was on Cleveland.com, where St. Xavier, which is a tremendous program in Ohio, he kind of basically just framed up Terrence Johnson's recruiting by saying, the feeling there is he committed to Urban Meyer to play for Ohio State. And Urban Meyer is no longer there. When the guy that's no longer there, who was the gentleman you committed to, then that commitment, in their eyes, is no longer valid. So that was a paraphrase there, but the gist of it was simply he committed to Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer is no longer the coach, and that's why his recruitment is opened up now, is because things have changed with Ohio State. And hey, last we checked, Brandon, Georgia knows how to recruit offensive tackles and 5-star offensive tackles at that.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about that. It's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Advantage with Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily. And another one of those names that's going to be there on Saturday is Kendall Milton, the 5-star running back. Heaven knows we've talked a lot about him. You know how much I like this young man and what an interesting prospect I think he is. What's he looking to see? We've talked about this kind of before, but now we're getting close to that visit. What's the vibe around Milton, and what's on his checklist for items that he needs to observe?
Yeah, so Brandon, with Milton, he's a guy that, this has been continued, consistent, sustained contact. He needs to see Georgia for the first time. I think his top 10 is really down to a top 5 or 6. I think he's going to get down to his top 5 after this G-Day unofficial visit. And I think what you're going to find is Georgia's going to wind up in Kendall Milton's top 5, and the official visit is yet to come for Kendall Milton. This is the part to make a really strong first visual impression with Kendall Milton. And all those things like you won't see a whole lot of carries or a lot of guys able to play in the run game. You won't see a lot of guys getting 60, 70 yards in the run game because Georgia doesn't want to wear down its backs for a meaningless game in April. So I think Kendall Milton will see a definite opportunity to come in and grab a serious chunk of playing time at Georgia right away. And that's what that family's looking for, Brandon. They're looking for a place where they can excel, and they feel that Kendall is good enough to play as a freshman. And Georgia's depth chart definitely sets up for that, whereas other schools might have stacked up 3 or 4 backs over the last 2 cycles that can really get it done and have all those laurels next to their name. Kendall Milton having a great first impression of Georgia, feeling welcome, seeing all the faithful and the patrons at G-Day. I think that will go a long way towards all that.
He lives way out in California. We obviously know that friendships play such a big role in all this kind of stuff. Do we know much about his social connections with these other recruits? I know that I guess he and Zach Evans sometimes tweet back and forth about some stuff. It seems like I've seen that. I'm trying to remember other guys that I've seen him kind of tweeting with, at least publicly on social media. Do we know much about his his connection, friendships, relationships with some of the other players that might be there on Saturday?
Well, Justin Robinson's obviously going to be there.
That's a good point.
Those guys played together and they connect socially, and more than just what you see on Twitter, Brandon, is those guys have group threads and they have group chats. I think the 2020 group chat has been valid for about 3 years now when it comes to the elite guys in the country. And it's funny how Milton's circle sometimes intersects with guys that are committed to Ohio State, guys that are committed to Oklahoma. And he just visited LSU recently for that spring game, and then he'll also check out Alabama a couple days before he checks out Georgia. So this will give a good picture of Georgia, but they have the big stage of a spring game, whereas Alabama's just going to have a visit tour and everything else to look for there. And, Kendall Milton is the one you start thinking about in terms of, the new high priorities for the class. And, it just kind of gives me a pondering question right now. And I know everybody's going to wonder, and the question we get on the forum is, how many could pop on G-Day and how many could commit on G-Day? Well, I wonder if, Brandon, what would be your reaction if Georgia ends up with 2 or 3 maybe within 24 hours after G-Day? Would you be wondering about that's too many, that's too soon? Can we hold the brakes on all these recruits, or would you be more of the greed is good, Brandon Adams, that I know you to be?
Yeah, that'll be greed is good, BA. There is no doubt about that. I'll be very thrilled if that indeed goes down. That's going to be a lot of fun. Let me squeeze in one more before we get there. This is a name we talked about for a while, and I made a big deal about it when he announced his commitment date. But, boy, it seems like there's been, at least from my perspective, radio silence since then. Anything to update on Jermaine Burton, the 4-star wide receiver? He's supposed to be committing on April 20th. Doesn't look like he's on board to be at G-Day, which is probably not an indication that he's coming to Georgia. I guess if we close the book on Burton here, too, what's the latest in all this?
Yeah, Brandon, you want this to be the close the book edition and open the doors edition. Well,
I guess so.
Burton's a guy that I think there's something to look at there with stability, maybe with Burton. How he's been in a lot of teams and a lot of years. He's gone from Hayesville Charter to ING, now out to California. There is heavy interest there with a school like LSU. I mean, remember at one time he was committed to Miami. So it's kind of been a really, kind of a spatter pattern, I guess, a little bit of how his recruiting has kind of been in a lot of different places. Family connections there. The Burtons know a lot of good people in Georgia. He just took another visit to LSU as well, and I guess that might be the guy that would be the surprise G-Day visitor and everything. But from everything I'm hearing, Brandon, I don't expect the neat little symmetry between Terrence Edwards and DGD, if there ever was one, and his birthday. He was his position trainer for the longest time, and Jermaine Burton's decision. I just think that seemed a little too neat and tidy for that to go the red and black's way on this one.
I don't know how comfortable you feel addressing this, but is this an example of one that got away from Georgia if he ends up at a place like LSU, or is this an example of Georgia having different 2020 wide receiver priorities?
I think there's a lot of 2020 priorities. I think a name that not a lot of people know right now, we've been touching on them on the forum this morning, is there's a really fast receiver, again, out of the Midwest, the Illini country in Illinois, but his name is A.J. Henning, and he's a guy that he just tested recently in St. Louis, and he put up a 4.47, I believe, on the laser. He put up a 4.08 on the short shuttle. If you go to his Twitter page, he's got Georgia all over it as his header. He's already taken a trip to Georgia as well, and that's something to think about as well as Georgia tries to figure out who they can add to Justin Robinson. I don't know if there's maybe 1 or 2 more guys that they will add at the wide receiver spot. 1, maybe 2 more guys at the wide receiver spot for the 2020 class.
All right, Jeff Sintel, it's our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Thanks for providing that when it comes to this growing list of visitors for G-Day on Saturday. We'll look forward to reading a bunch from you at DawgNation.com, including, I believe, a name you mentioned earlier, Jalen Kemper. You've got an update on him coming up at DawgNation.com today. I hope folks will check that out. And real quickly here I'll also say I hope folks will check out me along with the former great Georgia Bulldog John Stinchcomb tomorrow night, 6 to 8 p.m. at the Marlows in Dunwoody. That's 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway for our spring game preview. We'll be getting you ready for everything that following Saturday in Athens, starting at 6 p.m. tomorrow at the Marlows in Dunwoody. BA, that's me, John Stinchcomb, for our spring game preview. Jeff, we'll look forward to catching up with you again soon here as well. Thanks for being with us today, and I hope you have a great day.
Brandon, I want it on the record. Who wins, number one offense or number one defense at G-Day? You got to see the teams first in their makeups, or are you ready to put that one out there in the world right now?
Right now, I've got the number one offense is about a 9.5-point favorite, I think.
That's the Vegas line.
I think about a 9.5-point favorite.
There's something about receivers, something about defensive line, yada, 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 all that stuff.
Well, it's just the rules. I mean, the rules are meant to even in a ones-on-one situation, not these phony competition staged by some of these other SEC teams, but even in a best-on-best one-on-one situation, the rules still favor the offense. If you're not worried about getting hit if you're the quarterback, that changes the way you approach the game. So that's a nod in the favor of the offense right there. Now, could I be at the Saturday scrimmage last Saturday? I don't know. I'm making the offense a 9.5-point favorite. I'm pretty sure I'm not, assuming we're tackling to the ground in a situation like that. But in a G-Day situation with the fans in the stands and the band playing, at that point in time, the offense at least gets the extra nod.
Here's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see the offense operate under a 2.5-second shot clock, because I think that's the tempo that Georgia wants to play at. Remember the end of the Florida game and certain spots of the 2018 season where Fromm looked so crisp running the quick game. I think tempo is something Georgia will build into its offense. So maybe if Georgia had 2 Mississippis or 3 Mississippis to get the ball off, I think that would be a great indicator of how good Georgia can be in 2019.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jeff. We'll talk to you soon, all right?
See you, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
In our Facebook comment section on the subject of who's going to win G-Day, Ken Feinberg says, didn't the number one defense win last year? The truth is, I don't remember. And I guess if I'm going to make the offense a big favorite, that's also based on the assumption that Fromm might play a lot. The honest truth is he may not. So with that, maybe that's too much. Maybe that's too many points. But if it's Fromm playing with like spring game rules, no sacks, base coverage, things along those lines, then this offense at this point in time would be considered a pretty big favorite. But maybe they don't show all the weapons a whole lot in terms of Swift and Fromm and guys like that. I'm still excited about G-Day no matter what. I can't wait to be there. Also excited about Easter coming up on on Sunday too. It's a big weekend with G-Day on Saturday, Easter on Sunday. And speaking of Easter, don't forget that Kroger's got everything you need for your Easter dinner, whether it be boneless pork tenderloin, boneless chuck roast, Kroger spiral sliced ham. You want that Easter dinner to go well, that means checking out your local Kroger to get all the things that you need for that. Let's do our SEC Through now, and let me deal with a couple stories. And this is one of those things where this isn't a big deal now, but there's enough of these stories out there that this may add up to something later on. There's a guy named Lane Hatcher who was an Alabama quarterback, and the honest truth is I don't really know who this is. And I feel like I know most of the quarterbacks in the SEC, but I don't really know who Lane Hatcher is. But he's leaving the program. He's entering the transfer portal, and there are reports coming from Arkansas that the place that Hatcher was maybe initially going to go before Alabama became interested in him, Arkansas State, he may go back to Arkansas State now, which is seemingly fine. Alabama's got a backup in Mac Jones. They've got the 2 freshmen, Paul Tyson and Talia Tungo-Vailoa, to go behind Tua. They're all set at quarterback. This is the kind of thing that flies before the radar. But the one thing I keep noticing is, and I feel like there have been a few examples of this lately. I think Antonio Clayton was a little bit like this when he left Florida to go to Georgia Tech. It's amazing to me how quickly these guys go into the transfer portal and then land at a school almost immediately after that. It's almost as if, how much contact was really going on with the player and the school before they entered the portal. And for the most part, none of these things are that big of a deal because, let's face it, you want good landing spots for the players and everything's fine. But you just wait and let this evolve into something else, where all of a sudden it starts to feel like a blurred line between how much recruiting you can do for guys on somebody else's roster, and all of a sudden there's this feeler thrown out there of, if I did transfer, could I come here? Pretty soon that turns into, hey, buddy, do you know that if you did transfer, we'd take you over here? At that point in time, I think the favorability for the so-called transfer portal, I think it changes mightily. I think it's going to become really, really distasteful to some people. But keep your eye on this. When you see these guys pop into the portal and then almost immediately become linked to another team almost right away, it leads you to believe a lot of conversation's been going on before those players went into the portal. As of now, that's not that big of a deal because the players doing this don't really matter. But once there's this thing of coaches are recruiting players on other coaches' rosters, at that point in time, there's going to be, it's going to be a very interesting situation for college football, I think. Speaking of the transfer portal, Malik Langham, a defensive lineman at Florida, has entered the transfer portal. And this is one of those deals where I don't have a bad thing to say about Langham whatsoever, but this is a player that probably benefited from the Bama bump, maybe more so than anybody did. Now, he didn't go to Alabama, but he got a big-time Alabama bump because in the class of 2018, at one point in time, Alabama seemingly showed some interest in him. You know, he became a recruit that got a lot of chatter. Florida wins that recruiting battle, but it looks like Langham's not going to quite find a home there. And Florida's got, overall, I think some defensive talent. I don't know that's a bad defense for Todd Grantham there, but this is still a roster that has just enough talent to get by and to have lost, as I mentioned earlier, Antonius Clayton, already to be losing Langham right now, assuming he doesn't change his mind, decide to come back in. That's a little more attrition for Florida. You know, there's so much hype for the Gators. They're going to be a preseason top 10 team. They finished ranked higher than Georgia a year ago. But ultimately, I'm not sure how much there is there when it comes to Florida. This is still not a very deep roster. When guys like Langham are leaving without really finding a home, without really being developed, that's not a great look for me for the Gators, but we shall see how that plays out. Jeff Goodman has his preseason top 25 out. I mentioned earlier that he was, or at least when I was working on the show, I had him as an ESPN analyst. The truth is, I guess he works for Stadium now, which is a totally different outlet altogether. But he had a preseason top 25. This is for basketball. Does not have Georgia in his preseason top 25. He's got Kentucky. I guess that makes sense. They're number 3. Ashton Hagans is coming back. He's got Auburn, Alabama both in here. Alabama bringing a new coach. He's got Florida in here on the basis of some guys they hold on to, not one-and-done types that have chosen to stick around. But no Georgia in this whatsoever. So the presence of Anthony Edwards, the Ant-Man, as they like to say, at least this is the first way too early top 25 I've seen for college basketball. There may be a lot more of these out there. This is just the first one that I happen to see. And no Anthony Edwards, no Georgia in this top 25. That'd be a pretty big jump to go from not making the tournament a year ago to being in the top 25 the next. A lot of folks hope that Edwards can make some kind of push like that for Georgia, but as it stands right now, that is not the case, at least according to Jeff Goodman. Let me get one more SEC through story in here, and Jeff Sintel kind of joked earlier. This was the conversation with him where we kind of closed the book on a number of recruits that we've seemingly talked about a lot. I guess we'll now do that with another recruit as well. At one point in time, do y'all remember we talked a lot about Robbie Ashford, the quarterback from Hoover, Alabama? Now, I am very happy with the quarterback that Georgia does have for its 2020 class, Carson Beck. I think that Georgia's made a great acquisition with Carson Beck for this class of 2020. He was at Georgia this past weekend, expect to be back for G-Day. I think Beck right now looks like a really good prospect. But at one point in time, Ashford was discussed around here. He has released his top 8, as you would expect. Georgia's not in there. Auburn is, Florida is, Louisville is, Oregon is, Ole Miss is, Penn State is, Texas A&M, and so is Vanderbilt. So that's the top 8 when it comes to Robbie Ashford. At one point in time, he was thought to maybe be an Auburn lean, but with Bo Nix playing as well as he seemingly played this spring, he's in the mix to be the Auburn starter. My guess is that probably takes Robbie Ashford out of the mix for Auburn just a bit. Maybe it doesn't, but it would seem that Auburn has its quarterback of the future right now. That might, in some ways, dissuade Ashford from wanting to make that decision, but nonetheless, that's where that situation stands for now. It'll make that your SEC through. All right, here on DawgNation Daily, one of the things we've had a good time covering over the last few days is the state of the situation when it comes to the Diamond Dogs. Back at it in midweek play with Clemson here coming up, but coming off a weekend in which they lost for the first time a series in SEC play. They dropped the game on Thursday and Friday to Tennessee. They came back to get a win on Saturday in a game covered by the folks there at the SEC Network Plus. Rusty Enzer was one of the analysts for that for the SEC Network. Here was Enzer's breakdown of Georgia getting back to its winning ways on Saturday against Tennessee up in Knoxville, salvaging something from a series in which the Vols took 2 of 3. Here's Rusty Inzer from the SEC Network.
I think for Georgia, it was a nice bounce-back game. 10 SEC wins in the first half. They score more than 6 runs in those 10 wins, and they scored 7 today. That's a good sign for Scott Strickland's club. But Tony Losi was the story on the bump for Georgia, retired the last 12 Tennessee batters that he faced to earn his 6th win of the season, and Georgia wins the final game in this series against Tennessee.
So I think you still feel really good about where Georgia's baseball team is right now, despite the fact they lost the series to Tennessee. And, Tony Losi's a name we probably don't talk about enough on this show. We obviously, when we in the moments we get to talk baseball on the Diamond Dogs, we talk a bunch about Emerson Hancock, that beginning of series starter for Georgia. But to have a weapon like Losi at the end of these series to either clinch a series win or salvage something, I think that's a really valuable piece for UGA, and I think that Losi is a very big part of that story for the Dogs right now. As we said, though, last week, now I know what Enzer says there, that Georgia's found a way to score runs in most of the SEC games that it's won. The truth is in an era in which college baseball is a little bit more about pitching and defense than it used to be, Georgia's maybe more about pitching and defense than the average college baseball team is. So I think, listen, I'm no college baseball expert, I won't pretend to be, but it certainly looks like the Dogs are potentially on their way to being another national seed the way they were a year ago, and in that mix for super regionals and College World Series and everything else beyond that. But I don't get the indication that this Georgia team is going to be the kind of team that makes it easy. I think that that they lost the regional series last year, and that was a little bit disappointing for some fans who had loved the way they kind of popped there near the end of the year. And this year, I think it's going to be another sweat job. This year, to me, this team on a regular basis just does not score enough runs to make things easy. Is this the kind of team that can make a big postseason run and hoover in the SEC tournament and regional, super regionals, College World Series? I don't see any reason why they cannot, but I also think there are going to be some nail-biting, white-knuckle type games somewhere there along the way. So we'll look forward to kind of seeing that continue. It's been a fun ride thus far. This team is a lot of fun because of the heart and the determination they've shown, and it'll be interesting to see where it all goes from here. All right, we will wrap up this way, getting excited about G-Day on Saturday and looking forward to a lot of coverage for that. We will get to some of your announcements, or some of our announcements on that coming up in the days ahead. The first thing you need to think about is, though, we are at Marlowe's tomorrow night. Looking forward to being there at 6 p.m. for our spring game preview with John Stinchcomb. Then beyond that, we have a few more fun and surprises around G-Day that we'll look forward to telling you about. So we cannot wait for the culmination of spring practice this weekend, and excited about celebrating all of that with you. Also, though, even on weeks like this, we have our attention on Athens. We still think about Jacksonville, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. It's a rivalry that has been dominated by the Dogs the last couple of years. In fact, it's been 899 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten UGA. That's good news. It's our Gator Hater Updater. We love giving that to you each and every day right here on DawgNation Daily. We'll do it again tomorrow. We will see you then. Hope you have a great day, everybody. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down, where we get you a chance to respond to anything that you want to from today's show. We'll look forward to getting your comments. I will remind you, it's all brought to you by our friends at R.S. Andrews. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. They are the ones that we trust to touch all the bases and play all the positions. And all those, big systems in your house, the stuff that's behind the walls, they know about all that kind of stuff. So that noise that you're not quite sure what it is, or that thing in your house that just doesn't quite seem right, or that major appliance that's about to break down, whether it be the air conditioning unit, the water heater, or anything else, R.S. Andrews is the one to trust to get it fixed or replaced, whichever it's time to do. R.S. Andrews can do it for you, so please check them out online at rsandrews.com. All right, now, with that said, let's get a lot of your comments here. We got a nice little window of time to do as many of these as we can. Eddie Burleson mentioning the Braves tickets. Yeah, we're going to announce the Braves ticket winner tomorrow on the show, so be staying tuned to that. We will announce that winner. We're still collecting all those entrances. We had a lot of those entrances, so we're going to collect all those, and we'll be announcing that tomorrow. John Jared Bailey says, looking forward to tomorrow, letting all my friends know it's been 900 days. That's right, tomorrow's a big round number, 900 days. That's kind of fun. Good stuff. Miriam Martin Corbin says we're going to curb stomp the Gators again. Miriam, that's a great thought here as well. Philip Jordan Wells, funny comment about Dan Mullen. Yeah, Mullen, listen, he's a character. There's no question about that. Matt Miller says, haven't heard much about Clay Webb, have we? And yeah, I think that the issue with Webb is that Georgia is just very deep on its offensive line. In 2017, you needed an Andrew Thomas to play as a freshman. In 2018, you needed a redshirt freshman like Isaiah Wilson. In 2019, you don't really have that same need for a freshman, so it's going to be a little harder. The position that Webb's probably most suited for, center, you've got at least 3 former elite recruits that would be very good fits there. This is looking like it's going to be Trey Hill's job. It could be Jamari Salyers, Warren Erickson's, and behind them in that group, all 3 of those guys are guys who've been on campus and guys who are very impressive recruits at that position. In the case of Webb, he does follow in on that, but this is not the kind of offensive line anymore where I think you expect to see freshmen come in and make immediate impacts and make immediate splash. I haven't heard anything bad about Webb, but you're not going to hear as much about him for the positive right now just because there's, the main practice reps are going to go to other guys. Matt Rugavina says, I don't have any butter for my grits. That does not make for a pleasant morning. Yeah, that's bad news. Not good times. I like butter and I like a little cheese in mine too. Matt also says he tossed a little shrimp in there. That's always really good there as well. Our buddy Santiago Diarn says, BA, with the amount of speed we have in the defensive backfield and with the pass rushers, how many sacks will we have? 40 plus. And I think that's a great question, Santiago. And I'm a big believer that 40 plus is a important number for Georgia. We've kind of joked around here as a part of our R.S. Andrews School Down. It's almost kind of a magic number situation where you want to average more than 40 points a game and collect more than 40 sacks. If you can get yourself in that 40-40 club, you're looking pretty good. Now, not every team that did that a year ago was a national championship contender. Syracuse was also in that discussion. They were a very good team, just not quite a championship contender. But for the most part, 40-40 against SEC competition would be a pretty good thing to be able to do. Randy Hall says projection of commitments over the weekend. Boy, if you listen closely to Jeff Sentell a moment ago, he made it sound like he's thinking that some good news could be coming for Georgia. Now, don't let me set you up for him saying that's definitely going to happen, but he seemed to think that was a possibility.
The over-under is 2.5.
Over under 2.5.
Over-under 2.5.
My goodness, that's really interesting. Really interesting. Y'all listen to Connor Riley set the number very high there. That's kind of interesting. Groon D over on YouTube says he loves my hand gestures. Yeah, I have a tendency to talk a lot with my hands, and it's one of those things where I think it can be a little distracting to talk too much with your hands, but I also think you look like a sociopath if you never move at all. So I'm trying to, find the happy medium there, but I don't want to be too distracting. But at the same time, I'm kind of a fidgety, nervous energy person. Like if I'm ever in a meeting, I'm pretty much standing up and I'm always kind of doing something. I'm just kind of a nervous. Even though I think I have a kind of a calm way of looking at life, I don't get too worked up about anything. At least I hope not. When it comes to just like a lot of like nervous energy, I just kind of have a lot of it. So that's kind of my thing on that a little bit. Jay Wilcher says I think that Brian Harry will be as good, if not better, than Holyfield. I think they are similar prospects, even though Holyfield was the more famous name and the higher rated recruit. I've never really felt like there was a great deal of difference in the talent between the two guys. And so if Holyfield sets the benchmark somewhere around 1,100 yards, I could see Brian Harrion doing that this year. Andrew Hughes also asking about the Braves tickets. We will announce that winner tomorrow. We'll announce that winner tomorrow. Brian Kephart says, any Kirby word on just how much we see Cook at G-Day? Didn't know how he's getting over the injury. Yeah, I'm guessing that we don't see as much of James Cook, which is another reason why my thing about the first-team offense being big favorites of the defense probably, I'm probably a little too ambitious with that because I'm guessing there's not a whole lot of DeAndre Swift, not a whole lot of James Cook, not a ton of Jake Fromm. So, and I know that's not exactly selling the merits of G-Day, but my guess is we don't see a ton of Cook. Now, I could be wrong, and he carries it 25 times. But if I had to bet, I'm taking – and if I had any gumption about me whatsoever, this is what we'd do on Friday. We'd get an over-under list for all this stuff, carries for Cook and all that. But you got to do a little bit of research to get that done. So That seems like a really good job for Connor Riley. Connor, why don't you write that, and then we'll talk about that at DawgNation Daily.
Yeah, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to do something on that. Let's just say over-unders heading into G-Day for a couple of players.
I don't want to do the research to set the accurate lines because I think you got to use a little bit of the previous track record of G-Day to establish something. I don't want to do that research, but if you'll do that research, I will gladly talk about it and promote the work that you do. Is that a fair deal?
It sounds good. Here's an early taste. Which do you think we see more of? Carries from DeAndre Swift and James Cook combined.
I like this.
minus 120, or pass attempts from Jake Fromm.
All right. Ooh, that's a really good line. Swift, Cook combined, or pass attempts for Fromm.
Oh, you know what? Let's go touches from Swift and Cook.
Okay. All right. So let me repeat the question for everybody listening, because that was there's a lot going on here.
Parts.
So we're going to combine Swift and Cook's touches, either pass attempts towards them, targets, or carries, and we're going to pair that to Jake Fromm passing attempts. And Connor is saying that he thinks that the Swift-Cook tandem should be the favorite there. I'm going to say we get more Fromm pass attempts, because while I don't think he's going to play very much, I think virtually every play he is a part of while he's in the game will be a pass. So I could see him getting 9, 10, 11 attempts in this game. I don't know that I see a combined 11 touches.
11.5 was going to be my over-under for Jake Fromm passing attempts.
I could see him getting to 11. I don't know that I see a combined total of 11 for Swift and Cook. And I think that Kirby's just going to say at the end that he was looking to get more people involved. And now here's an interesting one, and I don't want to give the whole column away. What's your over-under for carries for Walter Grant going to be?
4.5.
Yo, if Walter Grant totes it 10 times, I'd drive from Jacksonville to see that. That could be a fun show right there, because we've heard some people say that Walter Grant's very hard to tackle. Like, it's one of those things where, like, he's not a running back, but when he plays running back, you got to find a way to get him to the ground, and that long body running really well is kind of hard to tackle. If you give me 10 carries from Walter Grant, that is a really entertaining brand of football right there.
I agree.
I don't want to see it versus Notre Dame. I don't mind seeing it against the second-string defense.
A few weeks ago, you were thinking, Walter Grant, it was just a trick, a one-day thing. You still owe me money for it, by the way.
Yeah.
But,
so I would absolutely be all about a huge number of carries for Walter Grant on GD. So that'll be really fun. That'll be really fun. Crow King's also touting him for number 2 running back. I still think he's an outside linebacker, but listen, it's G-Day, so why not make it fun? If Florida can bring Lito Shepherd in and let him play defensive back, there's no reason why Georgia can't let Walter Grant, a current active member of the roster, play running back. Now all of a sudden we just got requests. Brian Kephart says, well, if Walter Grant's going to run that much, I want to see Nolan Smith run the ball. Listen, he'd be another guy who'd be kind of tough to tackle. He'd be tough to tackle, I do believe.
He's not here yet, but there's only one real defensive player that I want to see at running back, or see at least I think it'd be fun to get carries. It's Trayvon Walker, who we've talked about a good bit. He's incredibly athletic, nimble. He's also just massive. He's 6'4", 280 pounds. He played middle linebacker for his high school team this past year. I would just love to see a running back of that size, not seriously, but I think it'd be a fun spectacle.
So you are probably a little too young to have remembered this, but Charles Grant, who had a pretty long career in a way, playing for the New Orleans Saints as a very similar defensive player to what I think Trayvon Walker's going to be. When he was at Georgia in like 98 and 99, he did play some running back. Now, he got hurt playing running back against Georgia Tech, but against Kentucky, somebody help me out with this. I know I can Google this, but help me out with this. Was either 98 or 99 against Kentucky. Charles Grant ran for like 60 or 70 yards. It's one of these things of, once again, like, he's not a running back, but he's really hard to tackle. That's my memory of Charles Grant running the ball for Georgia, was a game against Kentucky where it's like, this is an incredible athlete. Like one of the crazy good athletes to ever come to Georgia was Grant. Also, he was kind of a part of that really cool tradition of wearing number 19 at Georgia, right? Because, Ward was the 19 before him, and then Grant got the 19 from from Ward. I may be making like 60% of this, but I think I'm right about that.
That sounds about right. Can you name the current number 19 on Georgia?
Probably not.
Oh, come on! It was a number change.
Yeah,
you were very upset that this player made this number 10.
Yeah, this is Adam Anderson wearing 19 now.
Yes.
Yeah, honestly, like I am so confused by a lot of these numbers these guys are wearing now. It just takes me a while on stuff like that. I am not good with the number changes right away. Plus, I'm doing well if I can just remember from one year to the next what a guy was wearing the previous year. James Bryant says Nate McBride will shock the world and play fullback and get 150 yards up the middle and 3 touchdowns.
That's a good one.
Listen, if that happens, that he'll be carried off the field, and that'll be fantastic. By the way, Hugh Nash says, yeah, if we're going to start making requests, Nate McBride's going to get some. So here's what I'm going to say about McBride after last week. I know we all kind of joke about the level of attention he gets, and it's kind of a funny thing that he gets talked up in our comment section as much as he does. After talking with him last week, he deserves every bit of attention that he gets. I think that we ought to be giving a lot of these guys credit for the way in which they don't get sour while they are a part of competitions in which, I mean, a lot of programs, and maybe even Georgia in previous years, would have looked at Nate McBride and say, we are fine at linebacker, we got Nate McBride. And Georgia, to its credit, says we've got Nate McBride, but we want a lot of other guys that are good too so that we have the best possible linebacking core. That's probably what's best for Georgia, but it's clearly not what's best for McBride. If McBride wanted to pout and sulk about that, he would, from some people's perspective, have every right to do that. If he wanted to dart for the door the first chance this transfer portal became a real thing, he would have had every chance to do that. He and a lot of these guys, Notori Johnson, and maybe you add Justin Schaefer into that discussion, Mark Webb in that discussion. A lot of these guys are choosing to stick it out and fight. Now, some of the guys I mentioned are getting more playing time than McBride has gotten thus far, but they're choosing to be a part of this thing. They love Georgia, seemingly. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I've been so fixated on some of these guys who haven't played a ton yet, because the one thing that you hear a lot about them is the pride they have about wearing this uniform. And so I hope fans do give them a lot of credit. I think that's an important thing.
And, just to comment on McBride, I think to him, being a special teams player and a special teams contributor, which he is, I think that matters to him. I think that means something to him. And, sometimes, you need guys who are willing to make sacrifices. And, he could easily go play at, 70, 80 other programs in the country, probably even more than that. But, he wants to be in Georgia. He's from the state. I think he's proud of where he's from. And, I think the fact that, years from now, if he wants to stick this out and, it might work out where he's never anything more than a special teams player, but, he'll be able to look back and tell his kids, like, hey, sometimes in life things aren't going to go the way you want, but you can still, fight, claw, scratch, and, carve out a role and carve out a name for yourself, even if it's not as big as you want it to be. And I think that McBride, if that's what he wants to do, should be commended for that.
Plus, to add to what Connor said, first of all, there is a tremendous benefit to Georgia by having really good special teams players. I agree with that. But another reason why Georgia fans ought to be glad when guys like this stick with the program is because, in 2020, for instance, McBride then is a senior. Let me tell you something. As a senior, former number 6 linebacker in the country coming out of high school, at that point in time, you're a little harder to beat out at that point in time. Now, I know it's still Channing Tindall, and it's still Quay Walker, and it's still N'Kobe Dean, and it's still all that kind of stuff. But, look at Tay Crowder's story here for a moment. Crowder is using his experience to likely be on the field a good bit for Georgia's linebacker right now. It's an even additional dose of experience that McBride will have next year. So let's not write off the idea that he can also still be a linebacker before it's all said and done, even if right now he's obviously, fighting and scratching and clawing on the depth chart at the moment. Alex Dean in our Facebook comment section also has a really good kind of prop bet over-under type thing. He says which quarterback plays the most on Saturday, and I'll define this very specifically. If you're saying which quarterback gets the most passing attempts on Saturday, I think that Stetson Bennett is the heavy favorite to get the most passing attempts.
I would agree with that.
I don't know that DeJuan Mathis will be far behind, but if they think that Mathis is a little bit more of a work in progress right now, I don't know they're going to showcase a ton of that on Saturday. It seems like he's doing all the work they're asking him to do. He's growing into that role. But Bennett's just older. He's been around the college game. He played in junior college for a year. He was a scout team quarterback for Georgia in a year they were, he was pretending to be Baker Mayfield during practice. My guess is if you're pretending to be Baker Mayfield, that Oklahoma offense, you were throwing the ball a lot against a college football playoff level defense. That's a lot of experience that Bennett already has. So I think they feel comfortable showing Bennett off on G-Day. They may not quite feel as comfortable unveiling Dwan Mathis to the world. They want to put him in a situation where he's set up to succeed more so than not. So I think the overwhelming favorite to have the most passing attempts on Saturday is Bennett at quarterback. Who's the most likely Georgia player to get 2 touchdowns on Saturday?
You asking me?
I'm asking anybody. Anybody can answer this.
2 touchdowns.
Most likely Georgia player to have 2 touchdowns.
Brian Herring is the betting favorite, I think.
I would say that's probably about right.
He might get a goal line carry or 2. I think if you're going to go wide receiver, I'm going to give you Tyler Simmons.
That's interesting. Over Holloman then.
And I'm going to give you Matt Landers.
Wow.
I've made this reference before. I think Holloman is going to be sort of like the Zamir White of the wide receivers, not in the sense of, he's injured, but in the sense of you don't need to take him out of the garage to show off. You already know what you have in Holloman, and there's no need, to really risk him and, take it. Why take a Ferrari to the grocery store?
Yeah.
You're going to drive a Ferrari, use it on the highway where you can go 110 miles an hour.
So Enrique Murillo says Fromm's going to throw 2 touchdowns and then rest the rest of the game. And I guess in this conversation, I was kind of holding Fromm out. I meant more either rushing or receiving touchdowns. I don't disagree with you on that. Simmons has been around. Yeah, that seems to make some sense. I think Herring's a really good answer there. Let me slightly change the question because a lot of people are mentioning D-Rob here. What is the thing that could happen on Saturday that would generate the most conversation on Monday? Is it multiple touchdowns for D-Rob? Is 1 touchdown for D-Rob enough to send the hype train?
I think you need multiple touchdowns, MVP performance.
Yeah.
For D-Rob, just because we've been here before. With D-Rob, the opening game last year, he had against Austin Peay, he had a 72-yard touchdown run, and I think fans have tempered their expectations a little bit. There is a 1% chance this happens, but I think if Zamir White somehow gets a carry at all in the game, I think that's the biggest talking point.
I think that's less than 1%. I mean, that's
probably.
that's 0.0, right?
Yeah, 0.01. I could see him going out there and getting exactly 1 carry.
Chime Dog brings up a good point. If Walter Grant, we talked about before, if he does run the ball well, y'all, it's gonna be 6 weeks of this. It's gonna be 6 weeks of nothing. But I tell you what they need to do. They need to give Walter Grant more carries. It's gonna be 6 weeks of that. I kind of don't look forward to that conversation, but Chiman's absolutely right. That's all anybody will talk about. Patrick Nicholson says Dwan will throw a few checkdowns and try to make some plays with his feet. He'll pick up the playbook as the year progresses. That's actually a pretty good Monday headline. If Dwan Mathis rushes for a touchdown, that's going to have a bigger impact on fan conversation than you might think, Connor. If Mathis, even in this deal where they're not really allowed to hit the quarterbacks, if Mathis does one of those things where he makes somebody miss and Georgia lets that play stay live and he runs for a 40-yard touchdown or something like that, that's going to have a pretty big impact on fan conversation.
Do you want Bennett and Mathis to wear contact jerseys and essentially be able to be tackled?
It'd be more fun to watch, but I'm not looking to see either one of them get hurt. Mm-hmm. It'd be a lot more fun to watch.
Follow-up, do both Bennett and Mathis have more than 5 completions?
I'll say that one of them does.
Only one of them has more than 5 completions.
5 completions, only one of them. Only one of them. At least based on the – yeah, I mean, I think there's a very good chance only one of them has more than 5 completions. Oh, Jermaine Morrell, this is a really good one. What if Nakobe Dean gets 7 tackles? That's gonna,
7 seems like a lot.
Seems like a lot, but it's still a really good point of if Nakobe Dean's out there just dragging down ball carriers, that's going to be a hype train leaving the station. Yeah, and Cicero Williams is also right about this too. That and this I do think this is going to happen at least once. Nolan Smith's going to put some sort of spin move on somebody, one of the two tackles. He's going to use his speed and get around, and he's going to come, and as he says, it's a two-hand touch on the quarterback type thing at that point in time. They're just going to blow the whistle dead. But it's the winning move against the offensive tackle for Nolan Smith. It's going to get everybody talking. It'll be a big deal on the TV broadcast and all of that kind of stuff. So you let Nakobe Dean start getting a bunch of tackles. You let Nolan Smith put a move on one of Georgia's offensive tackles, and that's going to be a big deal.
For reference, only one player in last year's spring game had more than 7 tackles.
Who was that?
Monty Rice. He had 14.
Well, there you go. It's a line. Monty Rice had 14.
And no one else had more than 6.
Monty Rice is out there trying to earn a job on G-Day. I like that. And Joel Moody, credit to you for knowing that as well. Matt Turner says, is JJ healthy? I haven't heard anything one way or another about him not being, so I'm assuming he's completely totally healthy. Top fan Joshua Campbell says, I think UGA will air it out more on Saturday to limit carries on running backs, so both Mathis and Bennett will have more than 5 completions. You may very well be right about that. You may very well be right. Easy Brown says D-Rob gets 3 deep passes. Y'all, it's going to be, just explosions. If D-Rob's lining up out wide and catching those deep routes, I think that's going to be incredible. Is there an NCAA rule that would prevent Dominic Blaylock from playing in this game? What if they just brought Blaylock out and lined him up out there? By the way, Chad Williams has drawn a line in the sand. He says that Nolan Smith may be making a move on a tackle, but it won't happen at left tackle. In other words, Chad Williams says Andrew Thomas ain't getting beat by a freshman. Listen, that's going to make G-Day pretty fun right there. I don't mind Chad lining up his chips on Andrew Thomas's side. I don't mind that whatsoever.
I recognize this may not be fun for everyone, but I would have no issues at all if they stop spring game practice and let Nolan Smith and Andrew Thomas sort of go one-on-one, head-to-head, and pass protection drills, sort of like we saw with Tate Ratledge and Miles Murphy.
The problem with those Nike the opening pass protection drills, and you go to a lot of these recruiting camps, so you've seen a lot of this kind of stuff. But to the average person, it can be pretty misleading who actually wins those reps.
Right.
That's
a fair point.
What looks like a win in some cases for the people who live and die at these camps will say that's not what you think it is. So, I think that wouldn't be as much fun for me and the average fan as it would be for some other people, because a lot of those reps sometimes it looks like total domination when it's actually it's almost like riding a bull. Like the guy held him off for 8 seconds. What else do you want him to do? So Matt Rugavina says about the Oklahoma drill. Now that I wouldn't
hate that.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I like the one that Georgia shows on video. Mm-hmm. I don't know how new this is. Maybe this has been going on in college football for a while, where the guys start off laying down and they have to when the whistle blows, they all hop up to their feet. I really don't know what the purpose of laying down is, but it makes the drill look incredibly cool.
I think it's to sort of simulate, quicker decision making as opposed to the old Oklahoma drill where you have the offensive and defensive lineman line head up.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more quick thinking, quick
that makes
reaction
sense.
to it.
That makes sense. Matt Turner was not asking about J.J. Holland. He was asking about Jermaine Johnson. I apologize, Matt. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jermaine did miss practice, but he was also back out at practice Saturday, right?
Yes, he's been back at practice. He's been dealing with a sprained ankle injury, but it sounds like he should be good to go for the game.
Yeah, so he was a little banged up, and it sounds like the thing that he caused him to miss practice was an ankle that had been lingering for a while, but I think he's I think he's
and he had a foot injury when he first showed up at Georgia back in December, so, injuries have been a slight concern for Jermaine Johnson since he arrived on campus.
Tori Inslee says, BA, that's the Oklahoma. Yeah, I know that's what they do now, but the old school Oklahomas were you just line up face-to-face, offensive lineman, tackler, running back behind. It's just charging straight ahead. They do that a little bit differently now, and it's kind of a cool thing to see. Joel Moody says, hopefully Otis Reese is healthy enough to get a good look at his progress. Somebody a little earlier says, how about DJ Daniel getting an interception? The only not fun thing with the spring game is if Daniel or Stevenson, one of these newcomers, gets a pick, the honest truth is we'll end up blaming that more on quarterbacks than we will credit the defensive back for making a really good play. We probably shouldn't do that, but that's what we'll probably end up doing. Ooh, Jay Bolton has a good one. What if it's a huge day for Brenton Cox? That would be fun.
Be very surprising.
That would be fun.
And to Joel Moody's point, Otis Reese has been sick he was sick about the past week. That's why he did not participate in Georgia's scrimmage on Saturday. I just want to update that out there.
Wait, say that one more time.
Otis Reese, he was sick. He's been sick
Okay.
for about the past week, and he did not participate in Georgia's scrimmage this past Saturday.
Enrique Murillo says, I thought we were supposed to be in Athens today. We are going to Athens later on, but it's not until later on this evening.
Yeah.
So we're still in DawgNation World Headquarters for right now. We are going to have our post-game show from the bookstore. Hope to have some more announcements about that coming up really soon. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I can't really tell you about that yet, but we'll tell you about it coming up. Do I dare bring up, did you see any of Fields for Ohio State on Saturday?
I've
Did any of y'all see the game?
I've seen the highlights. I know there are some that aren't going to want to talk about it, but ESPN wrote a story on this that Fields he's not going to be a day one, step in, save the program kind of guy. He had a 98-yard touchdown pass to a former, highly ranked receiver over a, walk-on defensive back. But if you take that away, I believe he was 3 of 12 for 33 yards passing.
Yeah.
Fields did not show that he was, the dynamic, scan the field, make completions. And yes, it is a spring game, and you don't want to put too much stock into that. But he certainly did not, slam shut. He's going to be the guy, the starter at Ohio State this fall.
Yeah, my only take on what happened with Fields on Saturday is I didn't see the game. I haven't even seen the highlight of the big touchdown throw. But it's just really interesting to me. If you look at the array of coverage of the Ohio State spring game, and Ohio State's a major program, there's going to be a lot of national coverage of its spring game. Mm-hmm. It's amazing how different the accounts are. You can put a pile of them together that say Fields look really good. You can put a pile of them together that say, Fields has got some things to work on, maybe pump the brakes on the hype just a bit. It's kind of funny. Eyewitness accounts sometimes are unreliable. Eyewitness accounts sometimes are in contradiction with each other, and it seems like there's a little bit of a contradiction between the eyewitness accounts for what happened with the Fields on Saturday, and I can't really say one way or another because I did not see the game.
Yeah. I will say Ohio State did let him run the ball a good bit. I think he had 9 carries for 52 yards and a touchdown, and I think that's one thing, assuming he does end up being the starter there. I think Ohio State's going to use him a lot more as a runner than maybe Georgia would have.
Do y'all think, speaking of spring games, do y'all think the whole attendance thing that I briefly mentioned earlier in the show is as funny as I do? The fact that these schools are almost like playing Price is Right, price games against each other. Clemson has its spring game. Our attendance is 60,000. Alabama says just a little bit more than that. Ohio State says just a little bit more than Alabama's. I find that to be pretty funny. Do you think that Georgia lists an attendance number higher than 63,000 or whatever the number to beat is right now?
My over-under for that is 69,000 for the listed attendance number.
I think that's about right. Do you think Georgia will fudge its number just a bit?
Of course. Every one of these places does.
Yeah. But as I said before, if you got 60 in the building, you can call it 70. Nobody's going to dispute you. It's that point in time when you go below that. If you get like 40 or 50, like what Alabama apparently did on Saturday. Now we know, Alabama not afraid to make very bold claims when it comes to numbers. Just look at the national championships they count. But when you got less than half the building full, it's kind of hard to lie about your number. But if it's 60, you can say 70. Nobody's going to doubt you.
Yep.
And honestly, you probably should round up a little bit. All right, let's see. Anything else we want to do before we get out of here?
There was one comment that I saw. It's like I lost it.
What was it about?
I can't remember. Hold on. I think it was on Facebook.
Well, while you're looking for that, I'll read Dean Butler here. It says, do you think Holyfield, Hardman, and the other guys watch and wish they would have stuck around another year? Dean, I'll never know what other people are thinking when it comes to something like that. But I do think we are in an age in which players don't care as much about being first-round picks as their coaches seemingly do. And Kirby, to his credit, has not complained one iota about, juniors leaving for the draft. I think that Saban is just really behind the times. His whole thing of, if you're not going to be a first-round pick, you shouldn't leave. Well, it's one thing to come back and be a first-round pick and get that, tens upon millions of dollars. That's obviously life-changing money. But being a professional in the NFL is also in its own version of a life-changing situation. It's either money you can make now while your body's fresh that you won't be able to make in the years ahead, or you're starting the clock sooner on getting that second contract, where most of these guys, the ones that are not the bonus baby first-round picks, most of these guys end up making a lot of that money on that second contract. So the Hardman, Ridley, Holyfield situation, even Nada, who may have gotten the least favorable draft grade of all these guys, that's kind of where we are in this modern age. And every year there's this stat that comes out of X number of juniors, entered the draft, but only X number of, guys got drafted. A bunch of these guys got bad information. That's the way this is always framed. I honestly look at things differently than that. Life is about competition, and there are 10 gazillion real estate agents. Only a small number of them actually make really any kind of transaction. The same thing is true with virtually any kind of field. There are way more. Look at the people who graduate from law school that don't become lawyers. I'm talking about working, true, paid professional lawyers. Any field's going to be like that. The barrier to entry is going to just eliminate most of the competition. So juniors going to the NFL draft is going to be the same way. Not everyone's going to find a home, but guys want to compete, especially when there's money on the line. So I'm guessing that's how Kirby kind of feels about that. As far as how the players themselves feel about it, I'm sure there'll be a little bit of a tinge of, playing football at Georgia, one of these high-profile programs, is a really big deal. I'm sure there may be a tinge of, hey, it'd be kind of fun to go back and do this again. I'm sure there'd be some of that involved with that. But I'm guessing they all feel pretty good about their decisions. Even a guy like Holyfield, who got poked and prodded a bunch about his 40 times. I mean, I think even he, I think has probably a pretty good perspective about what it's going to take to get on an NFL roster. And as you get closer to the actual time where you sign up and you join someone's team, at that point in time, I think that how you ran the 40 becomes less important overall.
Two quick things. Chris Hayes, he asked about Devad Wilson. We talked about him a little bit more on the show. He's one of the guys competing to be the star, and I actually think by the time the season rolls around, he's going to be that first guy we sort of see out there at the star position. And then Dean Butler and a few other people have asked about Jacob Eason, and since we have to give time to Justin Fields, we also have to give time to Jacob Eason since, political, fair, and balanced. Easton's spring game is not this Saturday, but next Saturday, the 27th at Washington. Okay. And he has still not yet been named the starter at Washington, and he's competing with a couple of other prospects.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. The class right before Eason arrived, they actually signed 2 top 10 quarterbacks. One was like a top 10 pro style. One was like a top 10 dual threat. So because you have these different classifications of quarterback, a top 10 quarterback, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to define, how top 10 a top 10 quarterback really is. But, by classification, these were 2 top 10 quarterbacks. So Eason's not the only quarterback as a part of that competition. I guess it'll be interesting to see if he does actually win that one. I don't know enough about the other quarterbacks to say who should be the favorite. I'm assuming it should be Eason, but as it stands right now, I guess he hasn't wrested that one away yet. Do you agree with what I said about William Poole and Mark Webb and Devad Wilson a little earlier? That we saw Wilson play in the Sugar Bowl, and we heard what Kirby said about him last spring. So if Poole and Webb are being mentioned in the same sentence as Devad Wilson, I take that more as a positive about Webb and Poole than I do any kind of knock on Devad Wilson, because I think we got an indication that Devad Wilson's pretty good.
Yeah, and to the Mark Webb point, he was someone we talked to last week. He's played a good bit. He played, Kirby mentioned as the dime, essentially the 6th defensive back when they do go to that look. I certainly think Kirby Smart is very bullish on what he has in his secondary this year. Stokes and Campbell have played a lot, and there's still a good amount of upside, I think, with the two of them, along with the younger corners, Daniel and Stevenson. The safeties have some experience, Reed and LeCounte. LeCounte, he has to work on his tackling, but he showed a lot of positives last year as well that I feel like sometimes get overlooked. Otis Reese is a big body guy that can play a lot of roles for that defense. There's a lot of really good depth in that secondary, and I think there's a lot of talent as well.
Do you agree with what I said about LeCounte earlier? The fact that they are cross-training him at the other safety right now means they are looking at him as the heir apparent to the J.R. Reed role, which means that Georgia has not departed from him the way that some fans have seemingly departed from him.
Yes, and I did a story yesterday on Richard LeCounte and sort of hammer that point home.
Okay.
That,
I apologize for not having seen that.
It's all good. LeCounte is a guy who, he has his warts. He struggled in tackling last year. 15 missed tackles. He led the team. But I think he brings a lot of other things to the table in turn. Bill Simmons has talked about this with basketball players a lot. 90-10, they do 90% of the things well, but there's 10% that they don't do well, and sometimes we tend to fixate more on the 10% they don't do well. I think that's sort of the case with Richard LeCounte, and I think he's still going to be a very, very good football player.
LeCounte closed on a ball in the air against South Carolina. I don't remember the moment. I don't remember the the time in the game. I don't remember anything about it other than just watching the way that he closed and this ball in the air. And I remember thinking at the time of, okay, that's a guy you got to try to find a way to do something with. And it sounds like, in terms of knowing his responsibilities, it sounds like that's still very much a work in progress from where Kirby stands. But he's the kind of guy that brings, as Connor just said, a lot to the table. Last comment of the day belongs to Jennifer Caldwell-Sperlin, who says, who else is playing this weekend? Georgia is the lone SEC game, and I reckon there's a couple national games, but Georgia's essentially the biggest spring game of the weekend. So I guess that probably helps a little bit with the recruits on campus, and it probably also helps a little bit with the media attention that Georgia should get. Last week, obviously, the people were kind of dialed in on spring games because there were so many. This week, not being quite as many makes it a little easier for some people to ignore Georgia, but having the stage to yourself is probably not a bad thing, all things being equal.
Couple of I've got a schedule pulled up here. Miami, actually Florida and Ohio both have their spring games this weekend. Oklahoma State, UCLA, and Oregon.
But the only SEC game, though, right?
Georgia is the only SEC team.
Yeah, so that's going to be a lot of fun. We got a couple more days to get ready for it. I'd love to have you guys come out and see us tomorrow night at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody, too, for our DawgNation spring game preview. That's going to be a great experience with John Stinchcomb. John's also going to be with us on DawgNation Daily tomorrow. I'm excited about that. So check us out, 1317 Dunwoody Village Parkway, starting at 6 p.m. tomorrow at the Marlowe's in Dunwoody. And we'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. On the way out the door, though, let me also thank our friends at R.S. Andrews for bringing the R.S. Andrews School down to you. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. They're big supporters of us here at DawgNation. They love this time of day when we get to kind of just relax and take some comments and chat about Georgia football. So for supporting us, we'd appreciate if you support them. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you from Athens on the DawgNation video channels a little later on. And, of course, back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily Live. Have a great day, everybody.